Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the Connective Leadership Institute's panel discussion titled Using the Connective Leadership Model. My name is Esmé Taylor and I'm going to be moderating the event for you today. We're going to begin with an introduction of the panelists and then cover a brief overview of the Connective Leadership Model. And then finally, we'll move on to our panel discussion. Let's begin. Our first panelist is Sarah Smith Orr. Sarah is a business owner, entrepreneur, faculty member, author, and life/organizational coach. She's been using a CLI model for 14 years. Thank you for being here with us, Sarah. Next, we have Eugene Esparza. Eugene is an accomplished leader with a broad range of experience in higher education and international business operations. He's been using the CLI model for 8 years. Thank you for being here with us, Eugene.
Welcome.
Next, we have Susan Barton, who, in addition to her role as adjunct faculty at Azusa Pacific University, also thrives in consulting with organizations to help them journey through organizational change and individual and team development. She's been using the CLI model for 4 years. Thank you for being here with us, Susan. And last but not least, we have Kevin Walsh. Kevin is an accomplished leadership development expert and a seasoned executive coach. His consulting practice specialties include a wide range of training and development solutions, and he has over 20 years of facilitation experience. He has been using the CLI model for 12 years. Thank you for being here with us, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
In attendance today is also the co-founder and director of the Connective Leadership Institute, Dr. Lipman-Blumen. Now, to begin our overview of the Connective Leadership Model, I'm going to pass it off to our panelists, beginning with Sarah.
Good morning. Welcome to everyone. And I know that there will be people who will be seeing this recording and hearing the recording after we're finished today. So we want to make sure that we provide an overview of the Connective Leadership Model with an introduction of the why and then moving into what it represents before we move into the panel. What I'm starting with is a quote from our fearless leader, Eugene Lipman-Blumen, who, by the way, is serving in a background kind of role today. So she has wanted us to move forward with the program. But the quote is, "New rules for a new world, where inclusion is critical and connection inevitable." And I know that those of you that have worked with the model, or perhaps knew or have read a bit about the model, understand very much about the connection inevitable, but inclusion is absolutely critical. You want to flip this slide, please? I wanted to start with a quote, though, that Jean hasn't heard, at least from me. And this is by a statement made by Scottish-American naturalist John Muir. And he said, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else." And I think that really speaks to connective leadership and the world that we're in now, the state of the world, a global pandemic. The air we breathe is the same air that others breathe. Massive migration around the world of people from their homelands, where inclusion is critical for us to identify the gifts that they bring. And great ideological divides, which we're seeing in the United States and around the world. So now we see ourselves fully engaged in this connective era and connected in indescribable ways. And again, if we were to refer to the pandemic, we can certainly see how we have been connected in those indescribable ways. So what this requires, with these new leadership conditions, new leadership strategies. And the key leadership strategy, that of the Connective Leadership Model, which is more relevant today than ever. And I think we all agree with that. Esmé, you want to flip? So what is it that we need? We need leaders who know how to bring us all together for a world with connections vaster and tighter than ever before. We need adaptive leaders that really understand how to lead people who differ, to create those inclusive kinds of settings and work relationships and life relationships. Leaders who can bring us together and speak, and that's a Gene word, speak to our strengths. That is, identify through an interesting kind of relationship by understanding who people are first and understanding what they bring. I read a statement that Jay Conger recently presented on LinkedIn, and his interview with a leader who he was asking about, well, how do you persuade people to engage in a particular activity? And the individual responded, it's not about a skill set. It's not about things that you have to do. It's about a process. It's about listening. It's about understanding people. It's 90% listening, 10% collecting the ideas and moving to a conclusion. So it's about speaking to people's strengths and bringing them to the table to engage them in a dialogue in understanding and problem solving. So it's leaders who can use themselves as instruments to entrust, connect, and engage people in positive and constructive ways, who know what behaviors they should use depending upon the context and the situation. Leaders who can expand and change in a crisis. I work with students in a crisis leadership course, and one of the texts that I work with is called You're It, and an organization coming out of Harvard that studied how to respond in crisis situations. And they've emphasized the importance of being able to, as a leader, to move beyond their realm of authority to engage those who can assist and respond through systems and programs that they have no control over. But they're important systems or programs to include in the problem solving in a crisis situation. So I'm saying, like, think global pandemic. No organization, no leader could do this alone. It had to be effective response to the world. So an answer, yes, the connective leadership model, and a model from my perspective that really has no rivals for its adaptability and its value, where inclusion is critical and connection inevitable. So what we're going to do with the other three panelists, my colleagues, is to move through this model, and each one of them taking a piece of the model to describe what it is, what it means, and some examples.
Okay, who's next?
Eugene?
Eugene?
All right, great. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Eugene Esparza, and I'll be presenting the direct achieving styles of the model today. And we're going to start at that bottom arrow with power direct. And what we see with these types of individuals is they like to control themselves, others, processes, and resources. They like to organize things to bring order to chaos. And they use symbols to remind people that they are in control. And the two examples I'd like to provide you are Martha Stewart, media mogul. One example of how she uses symbols, or used to use symbols, when she was still the CEO of her media company. In her office, if you were drinking any sort of beverage, you had to put a koozie over that can. If you don't know what a koozie is, it's just a sleeve that slides over the top of the can, and it had to be this particular pink color. And she's famous for this because you would think that's a rather micromanagement type of thing to do, and I suppose it is, but it certainly does remind all the employees of who's in charge and to whom all the decision-making processes have to flow through. So that's my Martha example. And And maybe a little bit more current would be Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla. And he actually refers to himself as a nano manager, not just a micromanager, but a nano manager. From these two people, you can see how they like to control the means as well as the ends. Just in the interest of time, I'll move over to the competitive direct achieving style. And what we find here are people who like to measure themselves. They measure their success based on the current external standard of excellence. And they thrive on outdoing the performance of others. Their goal is to win and be the best. And my example of this is Tom Brady, the famous NFL quarterback in the early part of his career. So he had always dreamed of, as a little kid, he always dreamed of becoming a Super Bowl champion. And so he was going to do everything he possibly could to be competitive and meet that standard of success. Well, so he listened to his coaches, he watched tons of film to learn, and he even became the mentee of another successful quarterback named Drew Bledsoe. But once he got his chance to take Drew's place, he figured out that his formula worked. In fact, it worked so well that he has now won 7 Super Bowls, and he is still playing today. He's 44 years old, which is kind of a dangerous thing to be doing, playing football when you're 44. And so now he's kind of moved to the intrinsic direct style, achieving style, where he is now, he relishes the autonomy. Nobody's going to tell him what to do, how to do it. In fact, he's really almost like a secondary head coach to the team. And so he's measuring himself against his past success, but now he sees himself as the gold standard because he now has 7 of these championships, which no one is ever going to beat. And he won't be satisfied if his season does not end in a championship. So, he sees this beauty in placing himself against the challenge and the beauty of the process around mastering that challenge. So that's how I would explain the direct achieving styles.
Thank you for that, Eugene.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan, and I'm going to share a little bit about the instrumental achieving styles today. So where the direct styles that Eugene was sharing about are all about mastering your own task, right? This idea that the leader is using behaviors to get something accomplished directly. The instrumental styles are those that maximize the interaction with other people. And as Jean was reminding us earlier when we jumped on the call, the word instrumental was chosen because it's about the leader using their people as instruments for change, not in an Machiavellian kind of way, but in an ethical and moral way, a known way, a declared way to accomplish what they need to get done. So the first one, directly next to the power from the direct set, is the personal achieving style. And where power is all about being in charge and like the Martha Stewart example, kind of flexing that ability to be the sole influence. Personal is about using sense of self, that charisma, charm, intelligence, wit to get something done. Instead of power, it's influence that gets things accomplished. So the sense of theatrical, the ability to persuade and negotiate. A couple of examples I often think of when I'm explaining this is Gandhi as a religious leader, right? Has a sense of costume or ritual to get something accomplished, but huge amounts of personal influence. Or President Bill Clinton was a very charming, charismatic type leader to get things done. I think lots of politicians use the personal instrumental style to get stuff accomplished. Shifting to the next one, the social instrumental style is all about that mental networker, that person who knows a lot of people and is really good at connecting the dots. You need to meet so-and-so who needs to meet so-and-so. And together, I think you two could actually get this thing accomplished. This is all about leveraging the experience and the knowledge and the know-how of those around you, and then activating them to get something done. So connecting the dots. When I'm working with clients on those social instrumental achieving style, I often ask them, I say, tell me who here in your organization is your biggest networker? And they all know who it is. And if I'm asking multiple people in the same organization, I typically always get the same one or two names. We all know what it means to be that person who networks well or who's really connected. That's the social instrumental achieving style. And then finally, the entrusting achieving style. So this is that leadership by expectation. I'm going to entrust you to get something done. I believe you can do it. And so I'm going to empower you with my confidence. I'm going to empower you to go get that done. The leader using this style expects that this person will done it ethically, well, legally, that they will accomplish the task, but they will step back from their own sense of accomplishment and entrust the action, the means of getting something done to an agreed upon goal together. So those three are the instrumental achieving styles.
Thank you for that, Susan.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm going to talk about the relational set, and I'm really excited to talk about this set because these are people that contribute to others' tasks, but they also get something great out of it in return. So when collaboration is everything now. So the first one is collaborative, where people or organizations, they join forces. We're seeing a lot more of this because there's a need for it. And Gene always says the secret to collaboration is finding a common goal or something we have in common. That's where we start, is what we have in common. So even like coalitions of aerospace and defense companies, which have typically held their cards very close, tightly to their chest, have started collaborating. Because, and the thing is, we got to talk about what we're not going to talk about as well as what we are going to talk about. So say they're stealing each other's employees because there's a war for talent. We're not going to talk about that. But we are going to talk about that if we all come together and we all use titanium, we can lower our costs significantly and have a rep in our area if we all work together because we all use titanium. So that's our common, the one thing that we have in common. A lot of artists are doing collaborative efforts. And what's cool about that is you have people, maybe hip hop artists that are working with country artists, like a Nelly and a Tim McGraw or Ludacris and Carrie Underwood, right? As soon as they come together, what happens to the size of their audience? It doubles. I mean, wow. So if you're not able to collaborate in this day and age, you got to get over yourself and move through it. So collaborative leaders have a lot more cachet and a lot more ability to move things forward in this current connected world. Contributory is a really interesting one because that is one where they help others with no expectation of any of the credit. They just want the credit to go to the person who they're helping in some way, shape, or form. So I was recently I watch a lot of stand-up comedians, I always have since I was a little kid. And so I love it. And I was in the stand-up comedy world a little bit for a while. I know you're like, how is that possible? You're not funny at all. But what people say all the time is, when I make it, I'm going to come back and help you out. They say that all the time. How many ever do? Probably very few. But Tiffany Haddish is a phenomenal comedian, actor. She has a show, I think it's on Netflix, called They Ready. And she's literally gone back to all the people that she said, you're good, I want to help you out, and has them on the show. And yeah, I'm sure she uses her celebrity to make some of it happen. But the way she introduces them, it's not like, oh, I'm Tiffany Haddish and I'm giving to this other person. It's very much, this person is amazing and you have to. If you haven't heard this person, you're going to be their biggest fan by the time we're done. So it's a very humble kind of a thing, and I see her as very contributory for that. And then the last one is vicarious, which I got to be honest, this is one that I'm high in, and I used to poo-poo like, oh, it's not really a good leadership style. I mean, I'm sure it's nice to have, but it's not essential. But what you notice is that sometimes a well-placed, you got this, when you don't think you got this, and somebody says you got this, and all of a sudden, guess what? You got this. That is powerful. And so many of us need that. All of us need that. I'm telling you, I got it, you got this in 2009 from, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of her, Lipman-Blumen. She's phenomenal. And she gave me a well-placed, you got this. And I thought, really? Maybe I do got this. Maybe I actually have this, because she said that. So I'm inviting anyone. These are the people in your life that will not one up you. You reach out to them because they know they're just going to be happy for you and they're going to encourage you along the way. So I'm going to invite you to put your person, whoever that is in your life, in the chat, because I think it's important to give shout outs to those people who give us encouragement along the way, but don't want the credit and are happy as can be when we succeed. So that's my take on the relational set. Feel free to put your person in the chat, whoever that is, because we can give them a shout out.
Thank you so much for that, Kevin. Thank you all for that thoughtful breakdown. I love those examples. If everyone's ready, we can move on to the panel discussion portion. Okay, so let's begin with each of our panelists describing how you've utilized the connective leadership model in the specific work that you do. Anyone can go first. Maybe Kevin, since you're still unmuted and revved up.
You got me. There's so many things that I've used this for. I use it in Leadership Academy that I teach every year. I use it in different programs. I also use it in coaching. One thing that's really come up lately quite a bit is I'm part of a whole team that focuses, one of the teams I'm a part of is just focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we really talk about how things got to where they are and how systemic racism actually came to be. And so I love going back to talk about things that I've learned from Gene about the different eras and how the eras happened. You know, we had our physical era, which were, you know, our tribes were based on our boundaries, you know, on this side of the lake or this side of the mountain, the other side of the mountain. And then we started connecting based on ideologies. And ideologies are really what built the institutions. And so if an institution is built on ideologies from a long time ago, maybe those ideologies are still holding on to some of those original tenets that have an impact on people interpersonally and then internally as well. And so we kind of walk through that history, and it's such a nice way to talk about how these things were created, because yes, we create tribes based on our ideologies. Now, are there ideologies, have those needed to change? Then we need to change the institutions and the systems that are still a lot of times representing some of those long ago ideologies. So that's something that's just come up recently that I think is very much on the forefront.
Absolutely, incredibly useful. Next person want to jump in?
Sure, I can tell you how I've used it, especially early in my career when I was leading larger groups of people in the Navy. I think, you know, and I hadn't been introduced to this model, but I was using some of it without really knowing how important it was. But when I work with larger groups of people that are working with me, I've always taken the time to do at least a brief one-on-one with them and to ask them why they're here so that I can help them, I can help contribute to what they're trying to achieve in their position. So I found that to be very effective with young sailors. Because there was always a reason for why they joined the Navy, but I was never going to assume that I knew that reason why. But I always felt like I could connect with them if I could just figure out what their motivation for being there was, and then doing whatever I could to contribute to that. So I'm actually about to embark on a new job on November 29th with Kaiser Permanente, and I'm going to be leading 2 different shifts of people. So I intend to do the same thing because I want them to know that I want to be able to contribute to their success. So that's how I use it.
Thank you for that, and congratulations on that opportunity.
I can go next. I actually work as an external consultant, independent consultant. So I use it literally as a team development or coaching tool. Like Kevin said, it's great in coaching conversations with folks. Most recently, I've used it for a whole series of 360. I used the 360 module for a whole series of 360 evaluations within one organization, because while they were in the pandemic and folks were all remote, whatever, they wanted to use that as personal development time. How could they actually help their leaders retool, build self-awareness, be re-equipped for leading in this new space? And what did that look like? How is their leadership being received now that they were all distanced? And they had kind of a small team working on site, and how was that impacting differences and really interesting leadership dynamics, because you had this small critical team on site, but everybody else separate, and was creating some interesting leadership dynamics for in-group, out-group type stuff. So the 360 becomes really, really powerful when you suddenly get all these voices speaking in, and it was really quite enlightening for the team.
Thank you. Sarah, you want to round up?
Indeed. Well, actually, I've used the model for almost 30 years, so don't start counting. But I was introduced to Gene when I was completing my MBA at the Drucker School, and have used it ever since. So I've used it with community leadership groups as I've launched those, or with statewide leadership groups. I've used it in consulting with executive teams. I've used it now more currently. I'm using it not only with social sector organizations, but I'm using it as a professor in teaching leadership certificate, advanced leadership at UCLA through the extension program. It's a requirement for the course that they complete the ASI and the AASI. And what I do is administer first the ASI, and then they have an opportunity
Sarah,
to.
excuse me for interrupting, but maybe for those people on the call who don't know what the ASI is, you might say something.
Sure.
Okay.
So the ASI is the aspirational ASI, the Achieving Style Inventory. And the way I use that is to first have them take the ASI, and actually before the course starts, before the class starts, so that I have that information about them before they walk into my virtual or real classroom. And then after we review the model, the first session, and they have some homework, then I go into a coaching session with them, individual, one-on-one, online, or actually through Zoom. And then they complete the achieving styles, the aspirational achieving styles, which is based on our dialogue about what do they want to focus on as they move forward in their careers, their life, however they're going to move forward. And that's very, very effective to use both of those. I also have used the organizational, the OASI, as an overlay. When I worked with one in particular, I worked with a department, a major department with the county of Santa Barbara. And there was a lot of tension. The county was requiring that they do something different. And so I administered the ASI and then the OASI. What that measures is what the organization values or what the organization rewards in terms of behaviors. So that when you do an overlay, I've got my hands, when you do an overlay of their achieving styles on the OASI, you can begin to see where there's a misconnect in terms of what they think what they should be doing and what the organization rewards. And that was very enlightening for this entire team of like 16 people that I was working with. And as a result, they were able to develop plans for how they would take corrective action in their own work, particularly because it was a planning department. How they were going to work externally with their community and with the elected officials. So it was a wonderful learning experience to move through these different inventories, and then the dialogue and the work after that to help them move in a new direction. And then I just wanted to mention, I wanted to ask Susan if she would describe the 360, because you mentioned the 360. So if you could mention what the 360 is, that would be terrific.
Sure. In the same way, Sarah, that you were talking about using the ASI, the Achieving Style
Susan,
Index.
could you expand on that? Because if there are people on the call who are unfamiliar with the assessments or the instruments that we've developed, if you could just, indicate that there are other instruments and that we have a database and people can go on the web to take it, etc.
Sorry, am I answering that or Sarah? I missed the beginning.
You.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Sure. Yeah, there are, as Sarah mentioned, there is the Achieving Styles Index, which is the central base tool that allows people to measure how they use those 9 achieving styles that we described at the beginning of the call. And you can look at that from an organizational perspective, as Sarah said, with the OASI, there's an aspirational layer on top of that. And then the tool that I used most recently was the 360 module, which allows the individual person being evaluated to do the Achieving Styles Index independently. So they get to see how they see themselves using their different achieving styles in their leadership. And then we sent it out to a 360-degree perspective, right? Their supervisors, their subordinates, peer leaders, and we used external audiences as well. So we had 4 categories of people that evaluated them, and all provided data in that then allowed us to overlay the data of how others perceived or received their leadership to how they saw themselves, and painted a picture then for what does it look like within the organization where you're working? How are you received and perceived as a leader, and versus how you see yourself, and where are those congruencies and incongruencies that may need to be addressed so you can grow and develop as a leader.
And I would like to add that just recently, within the last 10 days, I do believe, and Esmé, correct me if my time schedule is off, but we have put up a link for people to take, anybody who comes across the website at connectiveleadership.com can go on and take the individual achieving styles inventory. And let's remember, these are behaviors that we all use. All that model does is articulate the behaviors that all people use, and they use them in different combinations and to different degrees, and they use them differently under different circumstances. One question I'd like to address to the panel is the issue of crisis, because in crisis, for me at least, I define crisis as a situation in which your ordinary coping mechanisms are either inappropriate, that is, they're the wrong ones, or they're inadequate. You don't have enough of them. So it means that you need to do something different than what you usually do. And I would like to ask the panel how they think the crisis that we are facing, which is huge. I mean, it's monstrous. I don't think anybody alive today who's grown up, nobody was living during the last one in, 1919 or 1918. But we all have faced smaller crises, and even those make us change our styles if we're tuned in enough. So I'd like the panel to talk a little bit about how they see people, if they've noticed in their clients or in themselves, changing during this, changing their behaviors or what we've called achieving styles during this pandemic.
If I could jump in really quickly, because there's one question I wanted to ask right before we get into that I think is going to be a nice buildup, as far as how the panel goes about even recognizing which behaviors or achieving styles are most appropriate for the particular situation that they're facing. So if we could just talk about that recognition process before we move into how we how that worked during a crisis, that'd be great.
And Kevin, maybe you can link in how you've used the model and then jump into the crisis.
Yeah, so, well, let me just kind of talk about how I've been talking about it recently, which I think incorporates both of those things, because we can't ignore that we're in a pandemic. And I think that realizing which styles to leverage is on the forefront of leaders' minds, right? Where they realize we can't do this. If I'm intrinsic, I can't do this on my own. I can't just make decisions and move things forward. I need to bring people together to make decisions. So even really highly intrinsic leaders, I've seen be more collaborative around this. And they're bringing people to the table that maybe have never been to the table before. You see, let's give a shout out to our HR people everywhere. I don't know how it all fell on HR's shoulders. Like, oh, your HR, do your job, plus you're all now epidemiologists. So tell us what we should do about this pandemic thing, because obviously you're experts in this. Every organization has done that I've seen. So let's give it up for our HR people. Thank you. We appreciate you. And we're realizing that, I'm seeing executive teams. I just was working with an executive team that had to come together and really make collaborative decisions. And they weren't always used to doing that. And they said, these kind of decisions, we have to be all in on. So I see those behaviors switching a little bit, which is cool. The other thing with the pandemic is, just to use another researcher out there, Kurt Lewin, where he has the model for change, the unfreeze, change, and then refreeze. Well, obviously, the hardest part about change management is that unfreezing piece, unfreezing things that have been frozen for sometimes over 100 years. So how do you actually unfreeze that? Well, I don't know any other way to refer to it besides the great unfreezing, because it's all been unfrozen because of the pandemic. It's all unfrozen. So this is a great opportunity to, if you say to organizations, hey, you got to rebuild your culture, because the culture you had is unfrozen. Plus you've onboarded a lot of people during this time. People have left during this time. You have all new teams. It's an opportunity to rebuild your culture. And culture is based on values, and that's what these things are they values. So what are we going to do? If we used to be very competitive with one another, are we going to shift that right now? Because how it works is, and this is just my take on it, is that, so it's all been unfrozen. It's changing. And it will refreeze. So do you want it to refreeze in a culture that had intention behind it, which would be a design culture? Or do you want it to be a default culture that freezes because it's going to actually happen? So looking at all the different factors with, the great resignation that is happening, and that really is happening, and the pandemic, and, our social environment as well. I mean, you could actually say that we're in multiple pandemics right now. So it really is important to look at all these different factors, and for executive teams and to come together with organizations and say, let's look at this. How do we want our future culture to be? Do we want to be more contributory and collaborative with one another? Do we want to, be more competitive with each other and make a conscious decision about that? It's just
Kevin, if I can just bounce off what you just said briefly, Jean asked kind of what are we seeing in leaders in crisis mode kind of thing, and kind of bouncing off what you said, I'm seeing two different things, and it depends if they're a healthy leader or an unhealthy leader, right? So my unhealthy leaders, I'm seeing revert to the unhealthy side of competitive and power direct leadership styles, and my healthy leaders are leaning heavier into that and trusting and collaborating type achieving styles, because they actually realize they need the village around them to get stuff done. But the unhealthy ones who are panicking and reactive to that culture shift that's been forced upon them want to micromanage and be massively controlling and kind of hunker down into the, I'm not saying direct leadership achieving styles are all necessarily negative, but they are reverting to the negative traits of those styles in their leadership styles, which it's really interesting. I love your thoughts on that kind of bigger picture. How are you going to be proactive about setting, in Lewin's model, refreezing the culture you want it to be, not the culture you ended up with?
And Susan, just a question on that. Does that have anything to do with the security, or insecurity of the particular leader, which kind of
Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying too.
The more insecure, the more unhealthy tendencies you see, and the more controlling they become.
Yeah, and I've worked with the leader of an international or global school, one of 17 campuses around the world. And she talked about how what she learned through it. And I had her take the ASI before I interviewed her and worked with her. She talked about how she had to shift and really listen to her faculty, listen to the students, listen in a very non-judgmental and an open way to the parents of these kids who were coming from around the world, some of whom could not return to their homes because of travel and a variety of other reasons. So she just said there were times when she wanted to take control, but she knew that if she'd done the control thing, that she would have lost people, and she would have lost her staff and their engagement and their openness to guide how they would move forward in the future. And so it was really wonderful. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that in this course that I'm teaching on crisis leadership, one of the things I learned very early on with a couple of people that I worked with, and these were speakers for the class, that no decision could be anonymous. You could not make a decision just for yourself. You had to consider not only your internal community, but the external community. You had to be able to engage people and systems that you weren't that familiar with, but you had to entrust that relationship in order to move forward in a particular direction.
Thank you for that. Eugene, did you want to hop in, or? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, for me, the pandemic really presented a personal crisis, and that was, job loss. So I think what's been really helpful is for me to realize how helpful this model is when you apply it to yourself. I tend to use the relational achieving styles more than the others. And since our environment was completely changed, we couldn't interact with people face to face anymore. Everything was online, virtual. I knew that I was going to have to set some sort of my own internal standards for how to achieve a new job, right? So the competitive side of me said, every single day you have to network with at least one person, even though it's going to be online. Because I knew that if I didn't use a more power type of style or direct type of style, that I just would not be competitive. So that's what I did. And even though it's, you have to step out of your comfort zone a little bit, I was just very directly telling people, this is what I'm trying to achieve. This is the help that I need. And it worked, right? So my new position at Kaiser came from me reaching out to others that were complete and utter strangers to me. I did not know these people, but I reached out anyway, and just very directly said, this is what I need. Are you willing to help? And it worked. And I just, if I can, I don't want to step too far backwards, but Kevin gave a great example of the relational styles of artists collaborating with other artists to broaden their market and fatten their checkbooks. And I just wanted to say there's a great example of that between Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg. And wow, talk about doing something counterintuitive, whether they know that they're being connective or not. You just wouldn't expect that, right? So Kevin, thanks for sharing that broader example. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was a good one. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to our last question before we open it up to audience members. So kind of as a follow-up to the crises question, have you noticed any difference between your use of the model in less pervasive crises and the current global crisis that we're facing? Sarah?
I think like Susan, and she was describing the differences, the not so good type of leader and the good type of leader and the shift. I think there has been a shift. And I think there's been more of a recognition of the connectivity of us all, and an attempt to make those connections in the way that I think you described, Susan, and maybe Kevin did, and that maybe there are some things that you don't agree on, but and Kevin, you did it, that you don't agree on, but there are certainly one or two things that you do, and it might be how you handle the pandemic, or it might be how you handle this crisis in shipping. You may not agree with all of the things that one party or collective parties represent, but you do agree on one or two. So I think there's been I'm seeing more of a recognition that it's critical that we be connected and that we operate in a connective way. And look at global warming, what's happening there. And so I think there is more of an awareness and making a difference in how people perform and lead.
I will echo that, Susan or Sarah, because you talked a little bit about systems thinking, really, like thinking about it as a system, which all things are, all organizations are, systems within systems within systems. And, that's something that we've been working with organizational leaders for a long time. They get it now. They're starting to get, because how do you not see that the earth is a system through the lens of this pandemic? If you're not, you're living under a rock. I mean, this is the biggest, clearest that we are one system trying to work together Like, I don't know a better example. So if you're blind to this, then there's no helping you. But it's such a good example that leaders are starting to go, oh, now I see how everything that happens in a system impacts the entire system. And it could be the smallest thing, but it could have a huge, huge impact. So leaders are really starting to embrace this concept, which I'm excited about. And then looking at, through this model and saying, okay, so what do we actually want here? What do we need to do? Because some of these styles are more in alignment with systems thinking. Right? If we're thinking as a system, we have to talk to each other, communicate, listen to one another, and understand what's going on in your world, so that when I make a decision in my silo, I mean, we hear this in every organization is trying to break down their silos. Everyone it's very difficult to do, but they're making an effort to do it. And I think they realize that the way to do that is to communicate and build trust and start collaborating with one another with some of those more relational styles.
It's interesting, Kevin. Not that social media should be the source of our intelligent information, right? Like that's not necessarily where we want to gain our insight from. But I saw someone post who had been for the sake of the phrase, a COVID denier, right? Someone who'd been very hesitant. This was earlier on in the pandemic, but someone who'd been very reticent about the United States' approach to the pandemic, whatever. And then they put up this post about saying, here's where it changed for me. I recognized that every country was doing some of these same protocols. And if this was the words, it starts with the C, the words left if this was a conspiracy, this was the greatest conspiracy manipulation in the entire universe, that we got every country to start to do the same behaviors and to take the same tactics. And like, how on earth would we have actually had unity amongst this disparity of countries? And for me, that reinforced that kind of systems thinking notion, right? The entire planet is a system, exactly as you said, and builds off of that how on earth do you have Austria and Australia and Russia all doing, and Italy doing national lockdowns if this was actually just a way to oppress their citizens? It was a really insightful kind of aha moment for the author of this post that kind of affirms what you were just talking about.
Right, that's a great example, Susan. And I've used that same example speaking with other pandemic deniers as well. A power style user, a direct style user like a Putin wouldn't shut down his entire country for a week if it wasn't a real problem, right? So perfect example, right?
And affirms what Sarah's been saying about us all being connected, right? This idea of a connected world, that we are all contributing and interconnected in ways that we never have been before.
Yeah.
We're all hitched. We're hitched.
Exactly.
John Muir said. I just love that.
It's a great quote. Well, thank you.
So
Oh,
I know we've got some questions
from the audience.
I know we've got some questions, so there were hands up. Yeah.
Chris, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. So, my work is often a combination of either higher ed teaching students and or consulting with organizations. I'm curious with the people here, how many of you have used the tools and the model and then introduce people and measure them and then come back after a treatment period, some consulting, a course or whatever, and measured a second time to see what shifted or changed? I'm always curious by that. I do a lot of psychometrics, and I recently published an article, but it was on cultural competency and tracked some students for 3 years. And I thought, well, are we growing this? Are we growing more balanced, connective leaders? Any of us?
Chris, because I'm in this advanced leadership certificate program, I'm in one of the early courses as well as one of the later courses and in teaching them. And I have definitely seen a difference because they have said, oh, do I need to take this again? I say, yes, I want to see how you are. It's been a year and a half, or in one case, it was 2 years. And they had indeed made a shift in their leadership behaviors where it was more rounded, where they were really using that repertoire depending upon the situation they were in. And they had actually moved to a new position. So, but it was only like 2 or 3 people. So I can't say that I have this vast volume of research, but at least with 2 or 3 people, that was true. And through a leadership program.
Good. Thank you. Others?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of that either, but it's something, an area of interest. In fact, we were just batting around the possibility of doing that for we have 12 years of Leadership Academy data. So how we may revisit that and say, where are you now? The other thing that I think would be really fascinating is to see, now that the pandemic has gone on for nearly 2 years, after a 2-year period, will styles have changed just because of our different access to people? I know that my first social interaction was way more awkward than any. My sister-in-law said something to me and I should have responded. I was like, respond, you're supposed to respond, say something now. And then now it's too late. Now it's awkward. I don't know if anybody else is feeling that, but it definitely has impacted my ability to socialize. So I'm working on it. I'm trying to get back to it, but I think it's got to have had some sort of impact. It'd be fascinating to see.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Chris. Kunal, looks like you have a question.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. How you guys doing? It's good to see everybody after the pandemic.
Hi.
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you for this amazing seminar. I was not expecting this on a Saturday morning. I had called actually Dr. Lipman-Blumen this morning to kind of get some insight on my dissertation, and it just happened that this seminar was happening. So wow, what a great chain of events that happened. But going off of what Chris just asked, I'm actually, as you know, I'm in the process of doing a dissertation myself for my doctorate in public health. And I received the certificate for the Achieving Styles back in October of 2019. So I have that training, but I guess I wanted to, kind of answer Chris's question and also ask a question to everyone else. How can I use these achieving styles or these leadership styles for my dissertation in the form of like in the hospital administration? I would like to ask, the leaders of the hospitals of how they have to change their leadership styles to, respond to the pandemic. Is that a good question for a dissertation? And I would certainly, in asking that question, give this tool to them and have them take the assessment, and then probably link their results with maybe the number of COVID-19 patients they saw. So any insight on that, if that is even a good topic for a dissertation? I think it would be amazing. But since I have you guys on, what do you guys think about doing that for a dissertation? Thank you.
Too bad you didn't have an opportunity to get their, to measure their profile before the crisis and now after the crisis. Because I think people do change in crisis. And I love Mara's comment in the chat where she says, don't waste a crisis. And who was it who said a crisis is too valuable to waste? That's
Ian Mitroff said it.
Who said
Ian Mitroff. Ian Mitroff.
Oh,
Mitroff.
yeah. Mitroff.
He said it. And his book is great, by the way, in terms of looking at the future and how you change the culture of an organization.
Sarah, looks like you muted.
Oh, I was finished. But yeah, Ian Mitroff made that quote. And yeah, and Kunal, I think that using the connective leadership model is a very effective way to move forward with your dissertation. If you're looking at the people and how people work together, I used it with social entrepreneurs and measuring how they led. And few people think of entrepreneurs as leaders, but they are leaders. And particularly social entrepreneurs are, because they're tapping into all these different stakeholder groups. So I think it's a great idea for you to move forward with. You may want to test out a number of questions, though, in terms of how you want to frame your dissertation.
I wanted to weigh in. I think it's a wonderful idea, and I'd be happy to talk with you. I did my dissertation 30 some years ago within hospitals, and currently work with some hospitals. So there may be, knowing that they're still in crisis, but I think that it could be really helpful for folks, and particularly as we, I don't know what the transition will be back to the new normal or the next normal. We have all these catchphrases these days, but to be able to look at how they're coping. And then you have your friend here not just starting to work for Kaiser. So Eugene, we can call on you.
Well, yeah, I absolutely think this is a great place for you to take the model. Even if you can somehow contribute some sort of knowledge to help solving just the staffing issue that the medical establishment is having right now. My wife is an RN, and I can't even begin to tell you how burned out she is. She will work literally 24, 28 hour shifts. And this model of just throwing money at people and in hopes that they will come in and take a shift, it falls short, because after a while there really is no value to the bonus. They will literally offer her $1,000 to come in and take a shift, in addition to what they're going to pay her on an hourly basis.
Wow.
But she's starting to say no, of course, because it affects everything else in your life when you're not sleeping for 24 hours. So anything you can do to help the leaders in healthcare understand that the staffing model is broken, it could be a huge contribution.
We have a few hands up. Kunal, is your hand still up from the last question, or did you have a follow-up to?
Oh, no, I just want to say thank you guys for that input. Last thing, I guess maybe Chris, this is for you. If there's any resources, any articles that you can send my way, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Of course. And then Art, did you want to ask a question?
I didn't want to ask a question, but I was responding to Kunal's question about his dissertation, and I think that it really could go in a lot of different directions depending upon the specific area of public health that you are pursuing. One issue, certainly the staffing issue, is a big one, and how is it that leaders are both recruiting as well as working with existing staff to prevent burnout and attrition and so on. But there's the whole then issue of vaccination and resistance to vaccination and response from leaders to that. And I think that it would be interesting to, and this is just off the top of my head, it would be interesting to do connective leadership with the leaders, especially those who are responsible for getting out public health messages to get people vaccinated. And it would be interesting to know if what it is how their own personal style and what it is that they think that they are doing in their organization to get out the public health message, and then to actually take a look at, to do some sort of archival research to take the actual messaging that they have done in a variety of forms, the paper form or the hard copy form, advertising on TV or radio or whatever, and to take a look at how what kinds of styles can be inferred from the messaging that they're actually doing. And to make those kinds of connections, I think could be helpful in terms of, here's some real life applications of, connective leadership in terms of messaging and marketing for healthcare vaccinations and so on. So anyway, that was just an idea off the top of my head.
I know we
could
have
just-
to call it a day soon, but I just wanted to add one thing about the hospital community. People who work in hospitals are used to dealing with other people's crises. And I think they think of themselves as being very competent to handle crises because it's always other people's crises. But now they're confronted with having to address their own crisis. How do they handle this? And I think that, involves a real shift in thinking. And one last thing I want to ask the panel, if you've noticed that there's an increase in entrusting behavior during crisis, because oftentimes people use instrumental, they use social instrumental, they go to the person or the people who have just the right training or background or experience. But when they're not available, we end up having to entrust whoever's there, who's ever on the spot, who can jump in. And that makes people nervous when they're asked to do something they don't know how, they haven't done before. But by and large, people rise to the occasion. So, and in the research and the data that we have, we've seen that entrusting ordinarily is not a highly favored behavior. But I think in crisis, it becomes an important go-to achieving style. But I want to add my thanks to Esmé's, to everybody who has been on the panel. I hope you all realize we sent the notice out just to a limited set of people in the connective leadership community, not to the world at large. And I value, and I know Esmé does too, everybody on the panel and everybody who joined and responded and contributed. So thank you, and let's stay connected. Esmé, do you want to close it out? I just worry about taking too much of people's time.
I completely understand. I think that you kind of did my wrap up for me. Just wanted to thank the panelists for participating.
Didn't mean to, sorry.
No worries. I'm very happy to see everyone. Thank you so much for the questions and all the lively chat in the chat room. And I'll give you guys a few more minutes just to get some information as we see that people are sharing their information to connect. But thank you and have a great day. Again, we will post this on our
Thank you to you, Esmé, for all the work that you did in preparing for this.
Of course, no problem. I'm going to stop.
And let me
All right,
suggest
you might